Hello everyone and welcome to Rocket Lasso Live, episode 21 of season 2. We've already had a little bit of a conversation with the people live in the chat, both on Twitch and on YouTube. There's links and questions coming in from all over the place. I have some very brief news here just in regards to 3D type things, and that is, let's share the screen. First of all, if you haven't already, I've been posting all of the archives to this live stream on a second YouTube channel. So this is the Rocket Lasso Live YouTube channel, and I will actually put a link to that in both the description and in both of the chats right now. So if you are not currently subscribed to that, you should, because what I've done is I separated out the tutorials, and that's on one YouTube channel, and then the live streams on a separate one. And the reason for that is so that anybody who wants to follow tutorials, which are more curated and specific, they can follow that and then not get spammed with live streams from the other channel. I put everything from season 1 all the way up to new, and I'm not posting the new ones on the other channel anymore. I'm not deleting the old ones, but I'm not going to add any new ones. And then I also just posted a new tutorial yesterday. I am currently on a streak of trying to do weekly tutorials. So here was this week's tutorial that got posted yesterday. It's all about making ferrofluids, and what's cool is the technique is pretty simple and straightforward, and you can, via using volumes, you can pretty much apply this to any model and any object. You see how quickly it's responding in the viewport, kind of in real time there through the video. So definitely go ahead and check that out, and of course subscribe to the channel to get these weekly tutorials. And then I guess it's worth mentioning that I do have a Patreon set up, and I've been posting the tutorials an entire week in advance on the Patreon, and you get the scene files that were recorded as well. And there's other bonuses, but we'll talk about that more at a different time. Right now, I'm going to start clicking on questions. I'm not sure where we started last time. So I'm going to start with a link. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. Maybe Gadir. I want to answer your question, but I'm going to do it second. So first I'm going to click a link one. I think it's just a better way to start. I randomly scroll and pick different questions. So let's see. A sparkly SpaceX dinosaur. That is intriguing. So it's actually very on topic. The two astronauts that went up on the new Endeavour capsule, the SpaceX module that went up to the space station, they always have some item that is going to show when they're in 0G, and it was actually the sparkly plush dinosaur. And so this is essentially a sequined dinosaur, and it's so cute. And I remember watching live when this just floated up into the screen, and it's pretty wonderful. I guess it's a pretty good question, where it's essentially a question of how do you make sequins. And we were recently talking about making scales, but this is sequins. And I don't know, this will just be very experimental because I'm not sure how well this will work, to tell you the truth. Let's see, what are my thoughts here? We'll keep it simple. I actually really like this question. We will keep it as simple as possible, and we won't make that many so we can build the concept. I am thinking we'll make a simple 20 by 20 plane. And what I'd really like to do is make a series of connectors, but can you connect to a soft body? Springs can, but if you, I guess it's just a straight up question I don't know the answer to. Can we use a connector to connect to a soft body? So that's kind of question number one. So here's the plan. The plane will be a simulation soft body. This cube will be a collider body. And if we hit play, that will fall away. This won't. Can we link them together via a connector? If it's not with a connector, it would have to be a... Oh, this is maybe going to be tricky. We might be able to do it with Espresso, though. Because I think we're going to have to make it in a very detailed way. If we're going to make it realistic. We could probably fake it easily, but we're going to try and make it a little bit more real. So, first test is to make a connector. And I don't really think the positioning of this matters, but I could turn on snapping. It'll be snapping to point. So actually, I'm going to snap it to that one just so it's a middle one, and make this editable. Select that point so I can see the exact point count. I can see that by going to structure and finding which point is highlighted. There it is, number 400 exactly. So this connector shall be a fixed connector, which will connect the cube from the center of mass, which is fine, to the plane, not the center of mass, but instead a polygon point. That point will be number 400. So that should be very specifically linked to that point. If I play, is this having an effect? Yes, it's a little bit weird. Look at that twisting, it's very bizarre. Very bizarre indeed. I'm not sure what to make of it. Now, the region of influence is going to be a big effect here. If we drop this down, yeah, see, that's more what I was expecting. This twist is interesting. What's happening is this is being forced in one particular spot. Actually, I don't know if I've ever thought about using a fixed connector as a way of belting something. Does this? Yeah, I mean, if I move this, it's going to force the cloth around. I don't think I've ever done that. It's pretty straightforward to do that. It does reset at 0, so you got to be careful where it seems like wherever this was living at the time of 0 is going to be the reset point. So important thing to keep in mind. I've always tried to do it with a spring. Now, something we're seeing just observationally is as this is curving over, you can see that's bending to kind of counter bend. It's even a little bit twitchy, but it's actually working better than I thought it would. Now, one thought could be, let's put this connector as a child of the cube. I'm going to hit reset PSR. We probably have to do that at time of 0. So it's at 0. And if this is currently a fixed connector, and I think that's going to be stuck there completely. But I'm curious if we change this over to, let's say, a ball and socket, this should be able to rotate everywhere. And will that rotate? Yeah, see, now it can kind of swing from that position. So it gives a little more, it gives more options. So this is actually pretty good. If we're going to really, really push this sequence thing, it actually might be a good idea to kind of keep it like this. What I'm thinking, we're going to continue to be methodical because this is an interesting question. At what point is that point? Scroll down, and it is number 420. So this shall link to a number 420. In addition to that, the cube will collide. Actually, no, this will say ignore collisions. So because the connector inherently makes these ignore each other, we should be able to move this exactly and snap it to that corner, and it won't be popping because it's ignoring that collision, which is nice. That is now welded there. And create a copy and snap this one over to here, and we will pin this as well. And that point count is probably the, oh, it's the first point, so it's 0.0. Easy enough. Connector attribute link to 0.0. I think that's correct. Looks like for some reason the fixed connector didn't move along with it, so I'm going to reset PSR. Oh, it looks like the top one's the one I moved. My mistake. So I'm going to hit undo. This one should be, how many? Do I have to go back? Yeah, there's 420, and this one was 0. There we go. So those should be linked on the corners, kind of free to rotate, but you see it's kind of pinned there. So this is actually a very good start, and actually something I'd never really specifically done with cloth, so it's kind of neat. Save the scene file. I guess I'll do a quick shout out that if you are supporting on Patreon, you get access to these scene files. I have no idea how you spell sequins. Sequins. I can't. I'm sequins. Oh, I'm so glad I'm doing this off camera because I am way off. No. Is it with a C? Sequin? Sequin? I see 2 different spellings popping up. Is that it? Well, this is what Google seems to be saying, so it's with a Q. That's why I was so far off, if that is correct. All right, well, let's just leave that as it is. Let's see, a bunch of people are, everybody seems to be, a couple people seem to know it, and a couple people are going nuts with it. So I feel like I'm not alone in this. All righty, so that is all working fine. Now, what would our basic rig, and we're trying to make this sort of real. Yep, yeah, a lot of people are getting it correct, but I was way off in mine. Now, I'm going to make this really low poly. And I think I'm going to sneeze. Ooh, excuse me. Okay, so this is incredibly low poly, but still kind of, still kind of round. T for scale, make it pretty tiny. In fact, we need these to overlap, but I'm going to make it exactly the distance between these. I'm not sure what it is. Select 2 points, and you can see it's 20 units, which means that this disc should be a radius of 10, which is half. The radius is half, which means it's now 20 wide total. All right, and then it will become a dynamic simulation rigid body. Now, I wonder if this will work if we say that this should be being viewed as a cylinder shape on the y-axis, which should make it calculate incredibly accurately. That's the hope anyway. Now we shall begin with making a single one of these. I'm going to move it 11 units out, so it's not quite touching the surface. And here's where things get interesting. I'm going to create another connector, dynamic. I mean, we could do a spring, but I want them to be pretty stuck where they are. But a spring might be a good idea. But let's hold off on that. I want a connector. Yeah, let's do a connector, which will connect the disk. And I'm going to offset the mass, but we'll do that in a moment. And it'll connect to the plane. And I don't know. We got a couple different options here. I did sneeze. I'm going, somebody's saying I'm going really detailed on this. And the reason I'm going so specific is we need to understand what the rig is doing. We can't be random on it. So this will be another ball and socket, I believe. But it kind of should pivot from 2 places, which once again is making me think this should be a spring. But springs are a lot more unreliable. So right now we could just eyeball it, but if we're being specific, I think we should link it specifically to a point. And that point is, can we scroll to it? Nope. So I just have to scroll. Yeah, I just hit the letter S to see if it zoom up. Okay, so 220. I suppose that makes some sort of sense. Plane, polygon point, 220. And region of influence, very small. And that links to the disk. And now you see it's actually going to the center of the disk. But if I change that to center of mass. Oh, wait, is there not an offset? Huh. Must be depending on the object. I thought center of mass would do it, but I can't offset this. Wonder what the difference is there. Interesting. A sequin is connected lower down. And I know there's a lot of people in the chat that are like shouting out like potential suggestions. When I'm actually kind of on a roll, I tend not to look over, and it just ends up being a distraction because it's just gonna be me reading it. I made it editable as someone suggested, and that is not the change. I'm actually a little confused as to what that would specifically be, but let's temporarily move forward as if, well, we'll just leave in the center, which is not entirely accurate, but let's move forward with it and see what sort of happens. So actually, that's just falling away completely. So that's not encouraging. The connector might need to be outside of it. Nope, it's still falling. Why is it falling? We are linked to the disk. Maybe we can't, because we're pinning cloth to an object, but maybe we can't link an object to cloth. I don't know. So if that's true, let's try hitting clear, in which case this will just be linked to nothing. It's also not refreshing fully. That would, nope, it's still falling. Okay, why is this disk shape seemingly not cooperating? I'll put that in object 2, clear, center of mass, hit play. It still is falling away. Just, okay, I'm going to, let's just assume something was not working with that connector. I could have done something strange. I'm not sure. We'll change our connection type to be a connector, link it to this disc. Oh, it is a cylinder shape, which is an unusual shape, and this thing is super thin. That could be a variable here. Let's change this to be a moving mesh. Nope, that didn't do it either. Let me think for a moment. The problem seems to be Basil. I'm not going to switch over to hair because I want this to be mechanically sound, and hair would be a fake, a super fake. It would be visually fake. This should, if we get this working right, it would be working for real as it gets in 3D anyway. Now it's not seeing the shape. Let me make sure I get it working right. Everything here is default. It doesn't have any thickness, which I don't think that would be a thing. Make it editable. That shouldn't change anything. Oh, but it did change something. In this case, you see it did stay finally. All right, now that is editable. Let's see if we can change this back to being a cylindrical shape. It does still stay there. I'm not sure what suddenly changed where it cares about it being cylindrical or not. That is currently center of mass, which we'll stick with. Then it's currently linked to nothing. Actually, we shall change it to the ragdoll again. Oh, not ragdoll. We change it to ball and socket. Let that fall. Okay, it is still working. I want those to be free to roam around. Also, if it works, let's save this again. I want this to link to the plane to a polygon point, which was 220. And let's see if that works. Yeah, okay, it's stuck now. I don't know why it wasn't working before, but now that we just rebuilt it logically. Now, currently, you see it is ignoring collisions. We don't want to ignore the collisions. We want it to collide with it. So now you can see it's not going through the surface, which is pretty cool. One of the tricks here, and this is where it does make me want to go with a spring, is that what we actually want to do is pull that as tight to the surface as possible. So I wonder if, can we fake, we can't offset it because these are all just set. A spring could be modified to be smaller and pull in tight. This is always going to attempt to maintain that distance. So as much as we just got that working, now that I think about it, I think it has to be a spring. Spring, bing. Okay, real quick, the disc. And this, okay, springs are what has an offset. So that's good. We can do the offset. Link to the plane, link to the point, link to 220, region of influence 1, disc, set the rest length, which is 11. I'm going to set it down to half the amount of 5. I don't want to, well, I guess we can start with a center of mass and we'll change it in a bit. The hope here is that will get pulled onto the surface in a pretty robust way. The damping, I don't care about damping, and it's very stretchy. You can see how it's boing, stretching. Increase the stiffness. And yeah, actually it's doing a much better job. And here's the idea. Because it is pulling, if you look at, let's even look at the dinosaur. Do you see how you can see these little holes in there? Those little holes are where there's a little thread attached and it can flip to one side or the other. So see, all of these are pretty much on one side or the other side. They can't be in a middle position very well. It's going to be rare for that to happen. So with that working like this, the problem is how well can we make a bunch of these? Because this is a pretty simple setup. Bloop. So how can we make as many of these as we have clones or points? In fact, I'm thinking everything's a little bit small here. So how cleanly can we make this? First of all, can things be made children? The fewer objects we have, the better. We don't need the connector. Can I make the disk a child of the spring? Yes, that's good. The spring is linking to a particular polygon point. That's fine. Can we, if we clone, it's not going to offset because we're putting that very specifically in a very specific spot. If we change this from polygon point to something like point selection, that won't work. We can say, a particular center of mass, but at that point we're linked to a very abstract place. So I think it has to literally be on this index. So here's where things get dangerous. I shall save it again, create a cloner, put the spring in the cloner. We are going to clone onto an object. The object will be the plane. It is cloning onto every single vertex. It is rotating in a not super helpful way. We can fix that easily. We want to tilt it down 90 degrees and spin it 90 degrees. Might be upside down. I don't think the direction specifically matters here. So that's all well and good, but these are all going to be probably referencing the original one. I'm going to immediately save this as a new number because I might mess something up. I think it should. Oh, yeah. Okay. So kind of in a very controlled way, you see everything is suddenly in a single frame forward. I didn't hit play. I just hit one frame forward. Everything's shooting into the middle because everything's trying to link to that original place. What's good to know is every single one of these is actually, this might be easier than I thought it would be. I hope this works. Every single one of them is snapping very specifically to that middle point because that's what they're all linked to. But we already know that is point 0. Presumably, that's also clone 0. So what if I tell this to be linked to point 0, and then, and I guess let's zero that out. That will be linked to 0, and this can also be moved because the position of that doesn't super specifically matter. So that should, let me just turn these off for a quick moment. Turn off the cloner, move that there. Okay, so just visually that's the same. Clone, those are the links. They might explode on these boxes. I'm going to ignore that for now. These are not currently overlapping, so the scale isn't quite right, but here's where things get interesting. If that is linked to point 0, and we make a second one, and we say that this one should be linked to, how many are there total? There are, this might work. There are 440 points total. So this last one should be linked to point 440. And then I suppose this copy, if we're continuing to be clean, we can move this there just so it visually looks correct. And then we say, clones, you are going to blend between those two states. So these are now 440 different sequins, each of them, hopefully, with their spring incrementing from 0 to 1 to 2, all the way up to 440. I don't know if that will work. Let's actually do our first test by just making this editable. Let's see if the second spring is index 1, the third spring is index 2. That is encouraging. Very encouraging. Let's hit 1 frame forward. Let's see. Okay, hang on. A little bit of weirdness, but they do seem to be sticking on their individual places pretty well. Yeah, not bad. Actually, not bad at all. Okay, so things we need to think about. First of all, everything's a little bit small. So everything needs to get bigger. Pretty straightforward. I shall click on these 2 springs. I guess I'll just scale them individually. Hit T for scale. Scale up, 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 up. I don't know how much we're going to overlap. I'm going to say 150. Bing. And on the other one, T for scale. Exactly 150. I want them to overlap. All right, nice. The cloner shall rotate not all this way. So let's say 80 degrees. So you see there's a little bit of space in between all of them. So they should fall in a very organized way. Actually, I'm thinking it might be a good idea if they're all tilted down just a little bit to begin with. So they all have a natural orientation. So I'm going to tilt them all down for their initial state to tilt down, but they still pivot from the same spot. So let's save again, frame forward. Always just do 1 little frame forward and make sure it's working. I'm not sure why some of them are like, we're going to freak out, but let's just hit play. It's actually running pretty well. It's not like, tons of frames. We're getting 3 frames a second, but considering how many clones we're throwing at this, it's not bad. All right. So, visually it seems to be working pretty well, but you can see that there's it's hard to, they're overlapping each other a lot. So a thought is, I don't know if this will work, inside of the cylinder axis, we can give it a size increment and or margin. I can never remember which one is appropriate. So I will give this a size increment of, let's do 2, which is probably too much, and hit play. I don't think it'll do much, but once again, you never know. Okay, it's not exploding, so we'll hit 2 and see if anything changes and see if that was the proper variable. I think it was, because do you see how they look like they're actually laying on top of each other? What we've done is given these thickness. Now, depending on the object you're feeding, like a spline, it has to be the margin, but on this object, it's the size increment. So these are all falling in that direction. So now we, in theory, have that pattern. It's a little bit chaotic. We don't have as much direct control as I kind of want. Now, currently, they're all being pulled from their center point. But because these are springs now, I believe we can change the center of mass. It's not trying to do that. It's trying to do it based on an offset. Temporarily turn off the cloner, and we'll just visually see it here. Currently, you see it's trying to snap the middle point over to that. But if we grab our offset and we have X, Y, Z, so X, -1, you can see I'm actually pulling the middle point back. And just like we can see in our reference, the pivot point is not all the way in the middle. So we can essentially split the difference here. About -7 in the case of what I'm doing, I think should work all right. And I did that on both springs at the same time, so those should all automatically have updated. Hit save again. We haven't broken anything, so frame forward. It seems fine. Hit play. All right. We still get that initial chaos. I'm not entirely sure if the initial chaos is justified or not. Everything actually did seem calmer in general. Now, okay, now let's see if we can actually make it do the sequin thing. A couple things I might do. Let's make this cloth not quite as bendy. So I'm going to rename our plane as cloth. That shall be, there's a lot of friction. I'm actually going to kill off the friction. I want these to very, actually we'll do that on both of the discs as well. I'm going to just put it 0 and no bounce. So the idea is like, it should be they can flow past each other very easily. Now it might be bad. It might start introducing a bunch of variation or something, but I think that's a good idea. And then under cloth, I want it to be cloth because I want these to be able to push back against the cloth and bend a little bit. That should help. But at the same time, I don't want these like bending down so much. So shear is actually a good one. I'm going to make that 10 times stronger and give it a lot of energy drain at 90%. Flexion's all right. Structural, I'm also going to jump that up to 1000, make it 10 times stronger and drain a lot of energy out. The hope here, and once again, 1 frame forward, seems fine. Hit play. I'm hoping the cloth won't bend quite as much. And yeah, it's better. Not great, but better. And actually, it does look a little more cloth-like. Actually, if we grab the flexion and we start lowering that, then it should be able to, it shouldn't bend as much, but it should be able to wrinkle more, if that makes sense. Now, we got to keep in mind that we have to have our camera a certain distance away because these will visually look like they're overlapping just because of the way the calculations go. Like the thresholds are not that accurate in the viewport, so it goes quick. So if you're close, you can see they're working. I want to see these a little more cleanly, so I'm going to hit NA, and you can actually see them look a little bit more like sequins. Under our viewport, set SSAO, give us a little bit of shadow, so they look more like scales. And let's create a material and put it on each of the discs. And pretty straightforward material under the color channel. Actually, let's do it under reflection if that works. That'd be really neat. Remove, add, GGX, very shiny. Reflection strength, that's great. No specular. And under color, let's see if this works. I'm going to throw a surface. Nope, probably effect. Normal direction. So these are the 2 different directions of the normal. So let's make a nice orangey color and a very heavy contrasting. Let's go teal, orange and teal. Can't go wrong with orange and teal. So, yep, okay, that's working in the viewport as well. And they're super shiny. So, oh, look at that. Look how nice that looks already. Wow, in the viewport too. That's great. So let's see how this looks playing. Save it as another version. Let's hit play. It's going to be a little chaotic there, but then they should settle in and be reasonable. Now, now I want to create a turbulence just to make some wind, get a little variation going. So there's a nice turbulence. I always jump this to about 55. and give it a relatively small scale. This entire thing's probably about 200 units tall because it's default, so that should give that. Now, these will also be blowing on the Sequins, which could be good, could be bad. Let's hit play from here and see. I mean, there'll be wind traveling through these, but I want mostly the cloth to be affected. Now, I don't mind these being affected, so we can leave them that way. Now comes the maybe kind of tricky part, and that is we need to... usually you can get the cool effect of this working because you run your fingers along it. That is going to be the tricky part here. Oh, but that looks so cool. Look at how sparkly they are. How do we run a finger along this? I don't think that they will... they might need some friction. Here's my thought. I'm going to give both of those very low friction. So they do have some friction. Collision, 1% friction, almost none. Let's make a finger shape, which isn't going to be too much like a finger here, but run this along X, rotate it a little bit, turn off snapping. I don't need it anymore. Make it pretty dang long so it can't mess that up. We don't need these extra segments. These rotations are fine, but I would like a cap with a bevel on it. We only need one subdivision. Give that a little bit. I guess we'll give it a couple. So that'll just be a little bit curved on the end there. You see what I'm doing? N to B. You can see the subdivisions here. Pretty reasonable. Increase this. That should be good. Okay. More frames. Rewind all the way. Double click to extend it to the full amount. So I am going to begin this somewhere like right there. Keyframe it, and then I'm going to have it go pretty slow. So we'll go all the way up to 160. I have no idea where everything's going to end up at 160, but here's the idea: is this entire thing is going to have moved like that to about right there. Now, I'm going to say that the cloth is still at 0 friction, right? Yes, it's still at 0. So this should slide right off of that. This finger will be a collider body. And it's going to have no bounce, but it's going to have crazy amounts of friction. Now, keep in mind, our Sequins each have 1%. So if we were to give it 100%, they would be getting 1%. But if we do 1,000%, they would be, the equivalent math would say that they're getting 10% friction. Now I'm going to put this up another 0. So while this has tons of friction, the Sequins don't really care about each other's friction, but they should care a lot about this one. That's the plan. I don't know if it will work. I'm going to hit NB, and let's just let this run through. I guess I'll hit save, and who knows how this will look. Come on, friction. It's going to be hard to tell until it moves away. Come on. Some of them are doing it. It's not super consistent, but some of them... well, here's the good part. You see how all the Sequins are pretty much flat on their surface? None of them are sticking out 90 degrees. They're all pretty flat. So some of them did flip over, and they are now stuck flipped over because it doesn't care which direction it flipped. It just cares if it's getting pulled really tightly to the surface. So that part of it totally worked. The friction here is going to be the tricky part. Because it's just the way the cloth ends up flowing over it. So some of those did flip over. I'm actually quite pleased. And if we stopped here, I'd be happy. I'm going to multiply the friction by another 10. So it's crazy friction. And these are now getting the equivalent of 1,000% friction when it comes to bouncing up against this thing. I'm not going to change anything else right now. None of that should change, but only the way it's interacting with this. So these should be very, very stuck on the surface. Actually, what's interesting is like, the cloth shouldn't be being affected at all, but the sequins might be pulling the cloth along it. So that's actually something to keep in mind. Maybe I don't want the finger to be so far back. Yeah, you see actually the cloth is completely ignoring it, but the things the cloth are connected to do care, and it is getting dragged way forward. So here's the next thought, just for having control over this. The finger will begin here, and let's just travel up. Now that won't work almost at all. Actually, we'll have it bounce up against. You see, it's going back a little bit. Actually, we can't be really, really accurate with this now I think about it. I don't know how flat those eventually lie, but this has to be right there. Keyframe that. Go to our secondary keyframe, and I suppose we'll just delete our. The only thing we need is Y, so I'm going to delete X and Y, holding down Control and Shift. So now it should actually just move straight up. Oh, I should have done that when I was at this time, but that's fine. I can now move this freely right about there, and that will move up, straight up. Next up, this is free cloth. It's free to move, but we don't want it moving all over the place. So I'm going to create a dynamic cube, which is right behind it, really tall and wide. And that's going to stop it from like going back behind it. So the cloth is still free to wiggle around, but it's not going to be able to get past this. It is a collider, just like this cube is. And maybe friction is a good idea, but the cloth doesn't have any friction, so I guess it doesn't matter. That's fine. Okay, let's just see what that does. Save it again. Hit play. Nothing. It should be safe to play because I didn't change I didn't do any dynamic calculation changes. Very bouncy in the beginning. We didn't really give it a settling frame. Come on, do it. Do it. It's moving out of the way. You see they're kind of dodging. Okay, let me think. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this if we are, if it's so specific, but a couple thoughts. One would be, let's make the pivot point a little bit further back some more. We'll be able to see it best down here. It's all rotated, but if this is pivoting offset even more, then it's going to be even more inclined to be able to flip. It's less than the middle point, so it has a very distinct pivot point. And then, I was going to lower gravity. So just to make it so that these don't care that much about the gravity. Oh, I wonder if we could use field forces. That could be interesting. But let's not worry about it yet. But the field force might go a long way here. Gravity. I was trying to remember what I was about to do. Dynamics, gravity. We got a lot of gravity. I'm going to leave some gravity, but it's now down to 1/5 of the power. So everything should be fine. It just should wiggle around a little bit less. Nothing should be dangerous of what we just did, although you see a lot of these do flip. Oh, the turbulence is going to be relatively stronger. Let's turn off the turbulence. We don't need any turbulence just for these tests. So those should be less inclined to flip upside down. So let's see. Those are going up. So this is better. Oh, it's working pretty well. Actually, look at how these are pushing the next series up, and with a lesser gravity. Oh, you see, gravity is still trying to make these fall down. So when it comes to the sequins, I feel like they should have pretty much no gravity. But look, it worked. They flipped over the other direction. So this finger technique totally worked. I'm very pleased. So honestly, how do we make these not be affected by gravity? Well, we can't say that they don't get affected by gravity, but what we can do is say no gravity anywhere, and then create a different gravity. I will do it with a field force. Simulation forces, field force. And if we set this to 40, that is the same as regular gravity. Create a solid, and this is saying up or down. Currently saying up. I'm going to say -1. And this is now full power down with gravity. And I shall say to the sequins that the forces, they only want to include forces. So they are not seeing gravity, but the cloth will. I do want to make just to distinguish, I shall make a material for the cloth. It can be actually pretty neutral. I just don't want it to be the same as the background. Make it a dark red. Hide this field force. Actually, I love the display, but it gets in the way a lot of the time, and currently it's just saying aim down. And also every one of those points is having to calculate. So turning this off will stop that calculation. Nothing's colliding. All of that should hopefully be working pretty well. There's no variation. It's merely going to be gravity straight down on the cloth, no gravity on the sequins. I'll save it to another version because it's going really well. This is actually the most detailed we've gone on a completely new dynamic technique and gotten this far with something so technical. Now, oh, interesting. They need to settle first. Okay, so here's what's happening right now. They need to get snapped into their position. They need to get pulled back, and they are not getting pulled back very specifically because there's no gravity, so they're not like inclined to fall down. And we kept on offsetting the spring a lot. I'm going to make it not quite so offset, actually, so that should be more inclined to pull very tight. And actually the rest length, look at this rest length is really long. I'm going to set it to like 2. It's very short rest length. Hopefully that snaps them quickly. But what's happening is the cloth is falling down, and thus these are the counter forces. They kind of look like they're tilting upward. So hopefully this snaps them. Okay. Oh, that was so good. So all I did was change the offset, and I made the rest length smaller. So the spring is trying to snap them in like really hard. Now, that might break the rest of it, but they did react very quickly to the surface. Now, this needs to, okay, the finger needs to catch them and get the initial flip going. And once it does, I think it would work well, but currently it's not able to catch them very well. So they need to, let's see, what do we need to do? I mean, we could do a field force. I don't want to do it quite yet because we're kind of making it real, but it is, I will say, it's tricky to make something move via like just a cylinder passing by it. We might have a little bit more luck if I make a cube to go along with it. So we can just think of this as kind of a fingernail on this. I'm going to move this very specifically here, and we're not going to give it all that nice rounding that was helping smooth it. And let me copy the collision tag. And just to show you, this is actually going to be super important. As these, we should see that these are going to snap into position very quickly. So it's going to be really hard at this angle to see them, but you see they're very, very flat. And if they're this flat, then they only have this tiny little bit of range for this to actually collide with them. So we're going to have to do a couple more tweaks here. Completely fine. I mean, when it comes to running, I mean, just, imagine a hand grabbing cloth. It'd be crazy specific. Tell you the truth, we're just going to turn off the finger and use this collider box, which means I can do an offset right here. I want it to be flatter. And so this can be right up against the surface here, actually at the beginning. Actually, you know what? I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to let this, it's not hitting the cloth, but it's going to already be not letting this first row fall. And that means these should not be able to fall, even though the rest of them will fall. And then, yeah, see, now they actually have already begun. They've caught a little bit. And that means as this moves upward, it should hopefully always be catching the next wave of them. Looks like it's catching the friction a lot. Come on. You can do it. It's a little more chaotic. Yeah, okay, it's so close to the surface, that's forcing everything up. So we have to move it back out a little bit. If this doesn't work quickly, then we'll just try the field force version. And if that doesn't work, then we'll just call this good enough. At least a slightly earlier version seemed to do the really nice flip. This will flip some of them, I think, but it's not consistently flipping all of them. Yeah, you see it is catching some. And here's the important part. When it does catch them and they do flip to the opposite side, they stay there. And it's all still cloth, so it will behave like cloth, and some of them are flipping. Now, it's not catching all of them. They're overlapping. We might need to increase the steps per frame to make sure that one layer could start the next layer flipping. That could actually be a relatively large variable here. I love the way these are like sparkling, which is just wonderful. So let's see. Yeah, Dean, I've been ignoring these, but these top sequins are just colliding with a box. So those are straight up broken. And all these ones on the edge are not going to be working quite as well. So I guess, if we want to. These boxes are very inconsequential, so I can shrink them down to 1 or 2 by 2 by 2, so really tiny, so they'll have a lot less effect, but still, hang the cloth just as well. What was I going to do? Oh, I was going to increase the steps per frame. So expert 10, I'll just double it. Let's go triple just for one test. It's going to take 3 times as long to calculate, but let's just see if this is going to be more consistent in its ability to flip the next row. Now, there's also the chance that the springs will, it's not quite doing it. They'll have to catch individual ones because one row is not enough to start the next row flipping, just based on the way they seem to be layered up here. And that could be very particular in the placement. This is no better or worse than what we had just a little while ago. So yeah, interesting. So there's, it was still on 15. No wonder it looked no better or worse. Or it was still on 5. So now we have a better calculation. I don't know if it'll work better because it's, makes, change the steps per frame, and spring changes, lots of things change. But yeah, it's more accurate now, but I still don't think it's going to dramatically change the way that these are struck. So yeah, we're kind of hitting the limitation there. I think we got the idea. We did see it successfully work, and even this will work a little bit, just not all the way. And right now it's pushing against the cloth too much. So I don't want to keep fighting and trying to make that work perfectly. So we'll drop this back down to 5, and the last thing we'll do is add a new field force and affect the sequins with the field force. And if that works, then cool. If not, then we move, then we've already got something working way better than I thought we would. So what is the thought here? The thought is, what shape would be good? Probably just a spherical fall off. So to begin with, create a simulate forces field force. This one will be for the sequin, field force sequins. This one is field force cloth. Field force sequins should not affect cloth. So cloth dynamics, I want you to include only your own cloth. And now these sequins should include only the sequin force. What is the sequin force going to do? Well, I'll do that same default value, which should be a strength of 55, and give it a direction. Actually, inside of object, we need to give it some sort of fall off. Let's think about this. I want maybe an outward and upward direction. I'm not sure how well that will work, but let's see. If I just create a solid, this is now saying I want full force blowing upward. Now, they have a particular pivot point, so that by itself might be good enough. In fact, this will be blowing up, so I wouldn't be surprised if all these suddenly flip up and they become green. So let's hit play, and let's see if this is enough for those all to, not all of them, but a lot of them. And not only a lot of them, but apparently the accumulated weight of that is heavier than the cloth, which is interesting to note. Let's make the cloth heavier. Clicking on the cloth, if I say world density, custom density, I'm going to try making the cloth 10 times heavier, and let's see if that changes anything. Yep, a lot. So what was happening there is all of the sequins were getting blown upward, and because they're connected to the cloth in all of these different places, it was pulling the entire cloth upward. I just said, no cloth, you are way heavier. You're 10 times heavier. So now all of these vertical forces trying to flip these upward are applying only to the sequence, and the cloth is heavy enough to pull down. So those got flipped up. Not all of them, but a lot of them. So the new thought is, let's make this, essentially I want to make this powerful enough that all of them want to flip. So pretty much, and now we've doubled the strength. So a vast majority of them have moved upward. Not all. I mean, we could go, if we start going too high, then it will, this is getting, it's not quite high enough to force the cloth upward, but there's definitely a kind of a neutral buoyancy going on. But now that does seem strong enough to flip them all up. Now, we don't want them all flipping up. We want only some, and some is where we tell them. So currently it's full power everywhere, but let's create a mask on our solid. We don't want everything pushing up. I want only spherical field pushing up. So we'll drop that inside, activate this because otherwise it's not seeing the data. We can set that to normal. It doesn't really change anything. But now this upward force, it's only pushing up still, but it's only happening where this spherical field is. So actually, if we hit play right now, we should see hopefully this middle flip up, and it'll slowly transition out to orange, which will be flipped down. Mostly. Now, some of these flipped upward, but those might have flipped upward because some of its neighbors got flipped upward. So that's just something to note. This heavier gravity pulls down the sequins. The initial state of the sequence is going to be really important here. So you know what? I'm going to force these all downward a little bit more again. So I'm going to say 80-degree rotation downward. So they're actually, let me hit NB. You can see that they're still not overlapping, but they're all flipped down to a bottom state pretty quickly. So based on that being the initial state, and this now the spherical field wanting to push upward, let's hit play. And let's see, they all sort of settle in. And yeah, you see, okay, you see these middle ones are attempting to flip up and everything else is getting all crazy sequency. Now, keep in mind the spherical field has a fall off. So it's full power in that little circle, but it's fading out to no power on the outside. Get T for scale, make it a little bit bigger. We still have these arrows aiming upward. I know what they're doing, so I'm going to turn off our display, and now we just see the spherical fall off. And let's do the full test by moving our spherical field down and then just keyframing it upward. Keyframe on Y, move it forward 100 frames. And at that time, this will have moved all the way up through. Now, I have one more thought. Currently, the wind is purely saying to flip upward, which is fine, and they are pivoting from a particular spot. But what might help is if we said, actually, you're also blowing a little bit outward. You're moving away from the surface. Generic, I mean, we could do it more dynamically, like we actually throw the surface in and be like, oh, push against the surface. But because we got this really kind of two-dimensional version of this where it's all very flat, I think we can fake it by grabbing the solid and making sure currently it's pushing upward on Y, but we can also push out on X. So we have X, Y, Z. So it's positive X. So if I say 0.5, then it's pushing up full power and it's pushing right half power. Hopefully, and that just means they want to flip out. And if they flip out, hopefully the upward force will want to flip them there. Now it's entirely possible this force will be enough to yank the cloth away from the wall, but let's just hit play and see. So it should have a little bit of time to settle in. They're still all clothy and wiggly. And now it's starting to move up, but, well, first of all, it seems like this first row was kind of blocking the second row because they flipped up so quickly. Something to keep in mind. We might want these to overlap each other more. It's, okay, I mean, it's working, and it's forces based, but it didn't catch all of them. But at this point, I think it's going to be a lot more consistent of a setup. So, couple things that we could do to make this fancier. Would be we have to increase the strength. I think pulling them forward is a good idea, but it might be a good idea to simultaneously push the cloth backwards. That's a thought right now. So let's say we were doing that. It's using the same fall off. So the cloth already has this setup. If we were to create a second solid, say negative 0.5 on X, don't worry about Y. And it is masked out by the same spherical field. I think that's all we have to do. And then set that to add. It should add onto the downward gravity force. So yeah, pretty straightforward. So now that will get pushed backward at the same time as getting pulled forward. And I guess the strengths are different now that I think about it. That's important to note is this is a strength of 222. Keeping these uniform actually could be a good idea. So if I select both forces and set them both to 40, they're both set to default gravity. And now I can say, okay, solid, you are actually going to be double the value. So it's double gravity. Now we're actually already at 3 times gravity. So I'm actually going to set this to 4 times gravity. And with that in mind, this solid should be equivalent to whatever I'm doing. So I'm going to say it is also 4 times gravity. So just in the fall off, it's pushing back really hard. These ratios could be way off, but logically, I think that makes sense. So let's let these start doing their thing. It's a lot, in theory, stronger. I mean, well, we're clamping. Let me also hit, I guess we have to do them individually. Don't clamp and don't clamp. That might have been stopping it from going above 100. Let's see. It's actually seemingly weaker. I mean, the strength went down. I'm not, to tell you the truth, I don't know for a fact that setting this value to 400% is making it that much stronger. I thought it would, but maybe it's not. So I'll drop that to 100. And as a secondary test, let's try jumping that up to 4 and see if that being 4 times stronger seems to give us a visual difference. Hard to tell. I feel like I'm seeing it move more, but maybe not. No. Well, that one flipped. It's not that much, though. All right. When in doubt, go overboard. So I'm going to jump that up way stronger. Oh, okay. Well, that one definitely did, because you see immediately there's a lot more of an effect here. Like, that's way stronger. So, yeah, I'm not sure, but I just didn't want to change those numbers so they could have more of a direct relationship. So, although, you know, even here, it seems to be flipping them back down again, or they're tilting back down. Now, that could have to do with we want our outward direction to pull more. I don't know. It's tricky. Let's just see. Flip. I mean, it definitely is stronger, and they're definitely flipping a lot of them up. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And the spring is mostly snapping them. Yeah, I mean, they do get snapped back. It's not catching all of them. It's catching a lot of them. I think we're in the ballpark. There would be more exploration to do here to make sure that they're working. But I got to say, I'm going to stop here because, you know, I could keep going for like 3 more hours. In fact, maybe tomorrow's bonus stream for Patreon, we will continue exploring this because it's really cool. This could be, you know, this could be good. Another, I'm not going to do it here, but there's some additional thoughts I have, which is currently the spring is snapping them back in position. Putting a connector also there and making the connector force them to be linked to a particular spot. So it wants to lay flat because of the spring, but it has to be pivoting from a particular spot from a connector could make this work a lot better. I do think you would need both. Yeah, I mean, if I didn't want to get to more questions, I would just spend all day on this because it's pretty cool. It's a really good question. Thanks so much. And it even tied into SpaceX and dinosaurs. So that makes for an excellent question. I mean, I love just rotating here and seeing these sequins. Like, that's so cool. I mean, keep in mind, you could, you know, make, you know, not animated sequins and just clone a bunch of sequins like this onto any mesh and let them do their random thing and just control it via cloners. So you could get a really cool looking effect like that and potentially fake it where this could pass through and they'd flip up. They'd pass through each other a little bit, but you could probably make it look pretty good from a distance, do the effect and not make it dynamically, you know, realistic. But you could, you know, with MoGraph, do the final effect, not necessarily realistically, but good enough and very art directable. So there's definitely more potential here. And it just looks so shiny. So thank you so much for the question. That is actually one of my favorites. So excellent. Oh, man. Okay, I have back to the chat to check things out. I know a lot of people were throwing out ideas as we went, but Dean, I don't know if there's a redshift equivalent to the normal direction. I'm not sure. A lot of third-party renderers don't see like the back faces, so I'm not sure. Let's just check some more of it. Let's see. Baz, welcome to finally making it to a live episode. Sparkly. Yeah, normal effect, super important depending on what you're doing. I mean, just keep in mind, we could have also made these be cylinders, and then one could have one mask, the other could have a different mask, and it would have to be normal. But it's just a way of doing it super low poly. Yeah, there's a lot of chat here as far as all of this is concerned. Targets. I mean, yeah, using Zach is asking about using target, and not, well, you could use a target tag and just do it MoGraphy style, but you could potentially use a target as a way of dragging or determining the direction of the field force. But we're already doing that just by saying travel upward. So I didn't use a target. I used a distinct direction. Jam, thanks. Yeah, just one more thing. Well, there's always more to do. Let's see. A lot of people are throwing in questions there. Oh, I just want to really double down. Make sure one of the reasons this was running so quickly and so accurately is because we were using a cylindrical mathematical shape and not just looking at the polygons. Keep that kind of thing in mind. Now, I said the next question was going to come from YouTube, so we shall do that. Yeah, Topcoat maybe could have made the material quickly, but kind of avoiding that a little bit. There was an earlier question. I've lost it. It's going back pretty far, but there was a question which was just, can you explain the Phong Tag? And I think that's actually a really interesting question. This is only going to take a minute, because there's not much to demonstrate. But let's talk about the Phong Tag. I don't necessarily 100% know these things for a fact, but here is my understanding. Temporarily, let's create a sphere, delete the Phong Tag, and we can see that we have all these individual polygons. Now, if we wanted this to look, I guess what we should do is, I'm not going to make it not editable yet. So we have all these individual polygons, and you can definitely tell it's a sphere shape, but you can see all this faceting. So the only way to get around this, if we didn't have the idea of a Phong Tag, would be to keep on increasing our subdivision. So we get more and 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 more. And if you see, it starts getting smoother and smoother and smoother. And at a certain point, it's going to be so smooth that it does look like a sphere. But of course, if at NB, you can see we have tons of polygons. And if we were to zoom in at any given point, we're going to potentially start seeing the faceting again, because there is a lot of faceting. So what the Phong Tag does is it's looking at any given polygon and then its neighbors, and it's determining the angle of it. How can we do this in isolation? Make it editable, select these two, and I just invert and delete those. So you can see that these two polygons, they have this curvature here. Now, the angle between these two is less than the threshold in a Phong Tag. And what you can do is imagine that it's taking the rays that are being cast. So, the camera is going to be tough to do. The camera is going to be, it's going to be wonky, but the camera is looking at it, and the camera is shooting out a bunch of rays. It's like shooting out a series of lasers going like, okay, I'm looking at that surface and it bounces back, and I'm looking at that surface and it bounces back, and it's looking at that surface, bouncing back. So currently it's seeing this as a flat polygon, flat polygon, flat polygon. But if you add a Phong Tag, then it's telling the camera, it's saying, hey, don't look at this as a flat polygon. Instead, it's almost like generating a normal map in a way. It's kind of like a mathematical normal map where it's subdividing it a bunch of times. And so it's like wherever the laser hits it, it's saying, okay, based on the laser, interpolate from one direction to the next direction. So it doesn't actually have to subdivide. It just happens on every pixel that gets rendered. So it hits the surface, interpolates between its neighboring polygons, and thus the end result looks very, very smooth. And the entire thing is, of course, going to be based off of the curvature, or the limitation applied to this tag. So if we lower this number enough, we're going to start seeing certain angles don't meet the threshold, like that. Those don't meet the threshold, so it's not blending between them. But these did meet the threshold. So the camera, the pixel from the camera, is hitting that and saying, oh, interpolate between that and that and that, and this would be the final resulting curve. That is my understanding of a Phong Tag. And it works just like a bumper or normal map would, which is, it's not going to fix your edges. The edges are still really there, but everything inside the edges could be properly interpreted to become smoothed. So hopefully that explains that. I'm not even sure if you're still here, because that was an hour ago that you asked about it, and that was really quick. So I'm going to take another question, typed out question from YouTube, and let's see what we got. Read through some quickly. Oh boy, that's really specific. Ron, let's see, what's that? Is there a way to apply a map of a image, like a PNG, like blocks of 20 by 20 colored tiles on a 20 by 20 tile object, and still maintain the MoGraph freedom to apply effectors without flattening the objects? I'm so sorry, but I'm not fully following the question. Like, I don't know what you mean, not flattening the objects. Javid, what do you got? Is there a way to exclude dynamic objects from being collided? Oh, that's an excellent question. I can do that quickly. And then also Jenny has a question. Can you put images with an alpha channel onto an object's edges? That's also an interesting question. I'll keep an eye out for that after we do this dynamic one. Here is actually a concept. I really want to work this into a proper tutorial, but you can make dynamic objects ignore other dynamic objects, but there's only one way to do it. I consider it pretty hacky. Actually, I'm really sad because this was going to be a part of a tutorial. It was going to be a part of my ragdoll tutorial that I did for Maxon, which was really fun, but I had to cut out like half the content because it was so long. But let me show you. It's actually pretty straight. It's specific and you have to control it, but it's actually conceptually pretty straightforward. Now, I do wish I haven't used a lot of other 3D software, but I did use Unity, and Unity's you make video games with it. And Unity had this really great menu item in the project settings that would be like, oh, you could assign something to Dynamic System 1, Dynamic System 2, Dynamic System 3, Dynamic System 4. And then you could say 2, don't look at 4, 4, don't look at 3. And you could make these different systems not interact with each other, which was really powerful. We don't have that in Cinema. So if we were to make 2 spheres with 2 different colors, these will just be dynamic. And if I play, of course, they're just going to... Oh, maybe I made them collider bodies. Whoops. Hit play, they'll fall, and they'll bounce off of each other and do their thing. Pretty straightforward, pretty boring. How do we make them ignore each other but both be dynamic? The only way I've ever thought of, but it completely works, is let's create a connector. And the connector has a unique property that nothing else in Cinema and not even the Dynamics tag has, and that is a ignore collisions checkbox. So if we make this it's currently a fixed, or it's a hinge connector, but if I set that to be a fixed connector, I can say, hey, you have a braking force and I want you to brake. Well, if that force is 0, then that means it'll brake with any force applied, which means it should be instantly broken. But it still has an ignore collisions checkbox on, which means if I hit play, those 2 objects will now pass through each other because they are ignoring each other but are still dynamic. So you see that work right away. I'm going to make a 3rd sphere here so that these will both acknowledge this sphere. And we'll make another color. Orangey. So this one is not linked dynamically, or it's fully there. So you'll see that this red one, what's the best way to show this? I'm going to scoot this red one that way a little bit, and we'll scoot this one that way a little bit. So the red one will bounce off, and that will bounce off. So it's still dynamically interacting with everything in the scene. But let me make sure that this one actually does hit the red one. It's going to be maybe tough. Yeah, you see it's still passing right through the red, but both of them individually will still bounce off of the orange one. So that is the way to do it. Use very weak fixed connectors with a braking force, and then they'll ignore everything else. So that is my process for doing it. And I don't run into the circumstance very often that I need to do it, but when I do, that's the one that works. It can be a little bit tedious. Dynamics, ignore dynamics. It can be a little bit tedious, like when it comes to the ragdoll. What I was having to do is the ragdoll had, it had like all these different body parts, all these different limbs, and I actually had to make a connector to every single one of them. And I mean, it's not like it's difficult. We can say that this sphere, you see, it's already this connector is already viewing that sphere. Probably a good idea to rename it red. So that's already viewing red. So I could just make exactly one in each of these and then just link the parent into it and it would break each of them. You have to do it individually. You have to control it all very specifically, but it's a perfect solution. It just, you have to manually set it up. All right. I should probably record that as a quick tip. I'm going to write that in my notes real quick. I might record that as a quick tip, because it did not make it into my other presentation, and I think it's worth living out there in the world. Quick tip. Yeah, dynamics, ignore dynamics. I'll have to think of a better scene file to do it, but that would make for a nice little mini tutorial. Jenny, can you put an image with an alpha channel onto an object's edges? I want to create an architectural render in an illustrated style using your own hand-drawn style. The tricky part with that, I feel like you're kind of blending two concepts into the question, which is making it a little bit hard to follow, because you're saying, can you put an image with an alpha channel onto an object's edge? So my interpretation of that is you want to draw your own line. We can do a very simple version of this. Actually, I think I do follow the question now that I've said it out loud a couple of times. What's the best way to do this? I'm going to open up Photoshop, make a new file, keep it simple, 500, about 500 by 500, create it. And let's see, create a new image, delete that. So we get an alpha, hit B for brush, make this bigger. And I'm not caring super specifically about this. And I wonder, I don't know if horizontally or vertically would be better, but let's just say that I had like, I'm going to call this an art style. So I've got all these lines. I guess it would maybe be nice if we drop the opacity down a bunch and just scribble, 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 scribble. This would be a lot easier with a Wacom, but I'm using my mouse. So, some different lines here, and we'll make a pretty solid one. Okay, so not amazing, but there's an image, and I shall save that into our episode 21 scene files, make a new TEX folder. Inside that, create a PNG. Make sure I go inside the folder. I do that all the time. Sketch 1, save. Okay, back to cinema. So imagine if you wanted that line to appear on every single edge. Now you have to keep in mind that, that would look really weird on a sphere. It makes sense on a cube, but on a sphere, there's an outline. There's not an edge, because these are all edges. But on a cube, it's really simple. It's clean. So there's all of these edges. Could we apply that line to all of those different parts? Well, yes, but I'm not sure how good it's going to look. So let's create the material. Hopefully I built it correctly. Actually, I can just make a luminance channel. And I guess no, there'll be no color. And then under alpha, I'll feed. Wait, first we have to save the scene file. 3A. Sketch edge. This one, let's feed the material. Scene files, textures, sketch 1. That's going to be the alpha. And now you can see I've got my line. And what's cool is I could even make that any color I want. So under luminance, I could say it's white or black or green. So we have complete control over those colors. So let's make it a very dark blue, because we can. And now make a plane. And I made that square. It's a square image. So I'm going to make a square plane. We don't need all these polys. So I'll set to 1, 1. Put it inside the cloner. Clone onto an object. The object will be the cube. I want to clone not onto the surface, but onto the edge of the object. So now there's one polygon per edge, but you see it's rotated to not a great orientation. So I'm going to set it to, I think, Z+. And it's looking a little crazy. How can we make this more? Okay, if I scale it down a little bit, you can make sense of it. You see that these are actually on the edge. Now, before we scale it, I want to make sure that these are aiming towards the camera, and that's going to be a big tricky part here. And that is target, which hopefully applied. No, it didn't. Let's drag it into the cloner. Target, it should target, look at camera. Yeah, see, then they all look at the camera, but I don't want them to break their axis. So can we give it an up vector of what I think is maybe X? No. Yeah, see, here's where it gets tricky, is we have to have it have an up vector, and it's not going to. And not only is it not going to, but the orientation is not great. Yeah, I'm not immediately thinking of it. Now, this cube all has the same size. So we don't technically need to worry about it, but we can turn on scale on edge. And if we crank this up, they'll stretch to match that length. And just to show you kind of what we've got right now, of course, I have it rotated. So 90 degrees, please. Nope. 90 degrees. Nope. 90 degrees. So there we go. Now you can see that that has cloned each of those onto an edge. So it's like, okay, it kind of has applied to those, and they're all facing outward. So that might work. But this one is perfectly aligned with the camera. So we're not going to see it kind of properly aligned. It's not going to be facing us. So it's a really tricky one. But, and so it'll overshoot and whatnot. Now, having said all that, depending on what your art style looks like, I don't see, I would just do, I just made some scribbles, but you could just do that with Sketch and Tune, super quickly. I mean, I really love Sketch and Tune. I wish it was updated because it was made a long time ago and it's still brilliant. Where do we make it? Materials, new sketch material. There we go. If you make that material like that, it automatically turns on the proper render settings. So now we've got nothing but the cube and the sphere. I'm going to apply this default. So it's currently folds, creases, and borders. And inside that material, pretty straightforward. I'm going to try and remake what I just had. So color, blue, very dark. Currently, so now there's this, it's solid, but we could give it lesser opacity. So it's going to become a little bit transparent. Give it a decent amount of thickness here. Let's say 10. It's probably too much, but let's say 10. Let's just see what it looks like in the viewport. And immediately we get those lines and they're overlapping and they're fading out on the edge. But we can start making it look a lot more interesting by making these not quite as thick, and then go into clone and turn that on. It'll make a bunch of duplicates of it, which will overlap on top of each other. And we can repeat as many of those as we want to. So let's say 9. We can decide a lot of different variations here on how thick they are, how much the opacity is varied, the scales, the offsets, the distortions. There's a lot of different numbers here, and I don't want to spend too much time going through. We can even give it like hue variations on some of the copies, so they're not quite perfectly overlapping. I'm not sure. Some of these need to be okay. That's working a little bit better with more variation, and I guess a little bit more thickness on there would probably go a long way. Yeah. So you see, we start getting this sketchier look, and there's a lot of controls that we can have. You see that we're getting this very faceted look on the sphere. But if I didn't like that, I think we can go under distortion. Actually, no, we go under strokes, and currently it's trying to match things based on the depth. But I'm going to say, hey, I don't care about the depth. I care about anywhere in the world. It can have a really big angle limit. The distance can be really big, and it's now trying to find edges that it could blend into. And I don't think we'll see that until we go into distort and turn on a curved stroke. I'm going to say, yeah, make a B-spline, which should be super smooth, but don't do any distortion. And yeah, now, well, actually, I went overboard. So you can see the sphere. Look at just not the sphere itself, but look at the lines on the sphere. Look how they're smooth now. So they're actually blending into each other. But I went so overboard that's even making the curves on the cube be round. And that's because I made these numbers so big. This join limit should be not that high. There we go. So now we get the cube. If we get the right blending here, then now you can see these lines there are proper, and the ones on the cube snap. It depends on the angle. It's actually screen based, so if this angle is kind of shallow, it'll hit this threshold and not break. So there's a lot of options there. As I don't, is there? I mean, there are places inside of Sketch and Tune that you can drop your own image. So I'm not sure which one I'd want to put it under though. But like under opacity, you can put a texture map, turn that on, and you can feed an image. So that same image I drew, which is probably not the correct orientation, but I can feed that into here, and that should be affecting the opacity. And I'm not sure how. It's going to be really hard to see with all this stuff layered up. So I'd want to turn off the clones and whatnot. And yeah, I think it's not the correct orientation because that's not working. But there is potential that you could feed images in directly. Personally, I would just build it very cleanly with Espresso. And as far as cloning the lines on, I mean, I can think of other possible ways of doing that as well, where you could convert these to some sort of edge, convert the cube, Shift S, type in the word edge, do an edge to spline. So now we have a spline, and that spline could be swept with something. So we can make an end side and actually give it a little bit of dimension here by adding a sweep to it, dropping in the inside, and now you see those will be swept, and potentially we could drop that material in. I don't know that my mapping, I think Yeah, I think it was just a bad idea to the sketch and tune. We lost all color and default lighting, which might be a result of the sketch and tune. Yeah, I'm not sure the way the mapping is mapping. Yeah, it's kind of weird. It should be UV, but maybe it's UVing. Every single one of these edges is connected, so it's only mapping on part of it. I'm not sure. There's a lot of variables. So trickier, but something to consider. I'd have to spend more time on that. I want to hit more questions. Oh yeah, and as XList is saying, it's also possible to create that kind of post-processing in, well, do it as post-processing in something like After Effects. Not something I'm an expert in, but could be good. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to repost them. I'm going to jump back to Twitch. If not, I'll scroll back up because I know we skipped over a lot of them. And why? Cubic. Yes, I'm not sure why the sweep is doing this the way it is. Actually, even along these lines, I was trying to do the sweep, but I wonder if it'd be better in this particular instance if I did the, or at least rarely used by me. Where the hell does this live? Atom array. Drop the cube inside the atom array. Well, I guess a copy of the cube in the atom array, and that will create these outlines. And unfortunately, the sphere is always going to remain, but if we gave that more thickness, that becomes individual geometry. And if we mapped that, oh, very strange. The mapping on that seems very similar to the sweep. Actually, yeah, I think I just drew that 90 degrees to what it wanted to be. Image, rotate 90 degrees, save again. PNG, sketch, save, override. Okay, back over to Cinema, go into the material. Under, I'm gonna double click. Inside of, I guess actually we have to go into the material itself. Reload image, that becomes vertical. Is it still not showing up there? The mapping on the UVs on these might not be correct. Oh, no, it is there. It's just very skinny. So those would have to probably become a lot bigger, which is non-trivial. Yeah, so those become, you know, maybe that's a quick way of doing it, but then you're gonna have to contend with these spheres on the edges. But then it goes back to just map this onto cylinders on the edge. A lot of it just goes to the polygons, the cards, these flat like sprite polygons aren't gonna face the camera. There's probably a proper combination there. It's just not immediately coming to me. But I want to tackle another question here. And this one was really sloppy. I don't think it's worth saving that one. So sorry I couldn't answer it more clearly. Some sort of, actually, you know, it would be helpful maybe next week if you're interested. You'd have to be on Twitch, but if you can find some sort of visual reference that's very similar online, if I could see what you were attempting to achieve more specifically, or something, you know, tangentially related, it would be a lot easier. But right now it's so abstract in my head, I don't have a good target. For a regular episode, we're actually doing pretty well on time. We got another half hour. Shane is asking, can you create this real world effect? And we have a YouTube link at the very beginning of the video, you say. The audio is muted. There's an advertisement. Skip the ad. Ooh, Nile Red. I love this YouTube channel. I know nothing about chemistry, but when I listen to him speak about chemistry, I just can't stop listening. It's really good. Ooh, look, Rocket Lasso is live. Anyway, I'm just gushing, but yeah, you should totally watch Nile Red videos because they are amazing. It makes chemistry very fun. It's like, oh, that's interesting. The process of like breaking down chemical bonds, yeah, it's neat. But anyway, this effect, I wish I had a good answer for you. I gotta say, I'm blanking a little bit on it. We could, no, yes, no, yes, no. How far does that go? I mean, it doesn't play through. Maybe he runs longer at the end. I want to see more of the effect. Like what happens when it keeps on going? I don't think it'll loop indefinitely. Like these meet each other and blend. A couple different ideas are coming to me. A lot of it's just based on mapping. How do we do the offset? Because I think there's a shader offset inside of fields that we could use. I don't know that we have the equivalent in a regular shader. Maybe we do inside of like third-party renderers or even the new Cinema one, but I just don't use the new Cinema texture nodes because I'm just not rendering in physical. So what's the best way to show this? What is the best way to show it? I have several different pursuits and they're definitely in contradiction to each other. We can't do it on all of them. One would be if we were to do this with fields. What's cool about fields is that we could make it drive a lot of different things. And doing displacement, well, we're doing this would be a vertex map. I'm going to pretty heavily subdivide this, make it editable, go to point mode, select, set vertex weight, set it to 0. That makes a vertex map for us. Now we can create a field. There's a freeze. We don't need that one. We'll use one in a little bit. Now we need a bunch of source objects. So I'll do that by creating a matrix object. It's got currently a grid. Actually, it's pretty much perfect. We just don't need this many. 10 by 10. And a lot of randomness. MoGraph random. Effector. Nothing on Y. And crank this until they're pretty much reaching the edge. Crank it until they're pretty much reaching the edge. Tell you the truth, that's still too many. So not quite as many as that. There we go, that's better. Those become source points. Drag this in as a... I don't think the MoGraph object works properly. Like, to me, this feels... I don't understand this menu. I should maybe get to know it better. But you see how none of these are giving us a fall off? None of these are giving us information. I've never been able to get this to give me information, and I don't understand it. So I'm going to drag in the matrix object as a point object, and now we do get a radius. If we click on this, we have something that actually makes sense. Now, here's... Well, what I'm going to do is increase that to a very large radius. So all of these are beginning to intersect each other a little bit. And... we might keyframe those, but that's one vertex map. I'm going to create a second vertex map. This second vertex map will see the first one. Now, let's loop this a couple of times. We can actually do this several ways, I believe. I think one of the tools has actually the curve has it. I didn't realize, I got really excited a couple weeks ago when I realized that it has a before curve and after curve, which is really neat. So watch this. If we move this down and pull this up, I want to smooth this out a decent amount, something like this. So you see we're getting a nice smooth curve in and a nice smooth curve out. And we can say after ramp, I want to continue. It should start looping. That's the idea. Now we are seeing this secondary vertex map. So you can see immediately we're getting this kind of fun offset. Now in the curve, the offset is going to be neat, but we need to repeat that a couple of times. So I don't want to spoil it yet. So how do we repeat that more times? Actually, we can do it again with a second curve. So here's another curve. I've got the first one turned off, so we're just looking at this curve. How do we clamp it? Or do we just start duplicating? Is there a double? Nice. Okay, so we can, let's do a similar thing. Or actually, do we just do it directly like this? I'm not even sure. Do I want to put a midpoint? That's just the same thing again. So pardon me, I'm going to duplicate my first curve. So we get this. And if we right click and say, select all, double, 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 then now you can see we're getting these cool little stripes. And I don't know if this will work or not, but look, if I grab offset and I start increasing the amount, those will start offsetting. Now currently it says after curve continue. Let's say before curve. I'll also say continue. Does that work? No, it's not offsetting fully in the way I want, but you can see that this is a cool effect, and it could be a good way of starting. In fact, look, I can drag this to -100, and this could be a single parameter. At -100, there will be nothing. And I suppose we can hide the matrix. Yeah, at negative 100, I imagine they'll disappear. And then we could just keyframe this up. And then they'll all spread out and they'll bump into each other and they'll each do their effect. And then eventually they'll erase themselves out, which actually I think is probably where the end result of that effect would be. So I do like that. That's neat. There's an animation speed. What does that do? Oh, okay. It's very fast. Oh, this probably needs to, yeah, this needs to be longer. It's always very unintuitive. I always expect things to be forward, but actually it looks like we can just keyframe this and let it automatically animate. So if we start at negative 100, we can let this automatically animate for us. So that's brilliant right out of the gate. Now, what I'd really like, and give us more frames, I'd really like if we just keep this repeating forever. Currently, we're offsetting the curve and it's set to continue. What would happen if we ping pong? That seems to do it. Set that to ping pong and this will just infinite. Okay, this was easier than I thought it would be. If we let this keep on going, this will just keep on looping forever for us. The fall off is going to be entirely based on the initial point condition. So if I tell this initial vertex map, this is always red. It can never quite get to that edge. So if I increase the radius of that even more, enough to, automatic or fade all the way to the edge. I know these are overlapping and we'll be limited to that amount of information, but now you'll see these will actually reach to the edge. That's working nicely. There's also probably a good chance we could animate the placement of these. Okay, that's fun. Index them so they're all individual. Animation speed is too fast. We'll slow them down to 10. Very slow. And because these are based on noise, wow, that's why I type in 11, because typing in 10, I always hit the wrong button. So these are now moving around pretty slowly, but the strength of this is relatively weaker because it's noise based. So I'll double this. There we go. So they should be a little more free to move around. And it seems like they probably want a bigger fall off here. I don't know how far it's going to break it. I think eventually we will break it. Yeah, the more we blur it, the smaller the ripples won't be as small, but we can keep on doubling those as well. So you see these are now animated and moving around, and they'll eventually blur, and we get a perfect constant fall off of the overall effect, which is just wonderful. That's looking great. The curvature that we are controlling this with, we could add variations in there. So some of them could be, some of these could be probably shorter. Some of them could be deleted, so they'll stay at a peak longer. So we can add variation by just scooting these around, making some not quite as tall, make some not go all the way to the bottom. I think we just want to make sure the beginning and end go to the same place. So just by adding in that type of thing, I think that we can make those have a lot more okay. I thought this was going to take a lot longer to do, and it's actually working incredibly well. And this all goes to, I've always loved using a spline parameter as a way of controlling things. And like, I would rather control a gradient with a spline parameter than with like knots, because this means something to me. But because you're always dealing with gamma and fighting back and forth, you always have all these limitations. So this constantly expanding and doing this type of shape, like, man, we just get so much control over that. There's a good chance we could, this is all just this initial state. So we fed it in with this matrix, and that matrix is a good start, and I'll save this because this is looking wonderful. And I guess what we should do is start looking at this or make it more visible. So why not make a plane? And this will be a deformer. It'll push things up 50 units into the air because it will deform the points based on the fall off of this vertex map. Okay, 50 points is too much. 15, a little more reasonable. And that's going to run really pretty cleanly. We're at 11 frames a second, so not super fast, but you can see these. Yeah, I guess it's still a little bit harsh. This wants to be more shallow. Yeah, there we go. So, that's already looking like weird and gooey and organic. A smoothing deformer on top of this would go a long way. And I never should have peaked, though we shouldn't do this peak here. A little peak is fine, but we don't want it to be stuck up at a peak, so that they'll never do that. And then even here, you can see how much better it looks with color. So keep in mind that making a material, we can feed that in as a colorizer, but even cooler, we can add in a other vertex color map And this vertex color map will be using fields, and the field will be that one that we are offsetting. And remapping, yes, enable remapping. That can be linear, but that by enabling remapping, we can now control the color remap, which we can say, yes, I want a gradient to control it. And now we can feed this through any cycle of colors that we are inclined to. And those will travel along and around and look all super crazy. We won't see it here, but it is as simple as going into our color channel, feeding this a MoGraph color. Nope, not MoGraph color shader. We just want a effect vertex map, and the vertex map will accept color vertex maps as well. And there we go. Now that's actually there in the viewport. Getting all crazy looking. Blurp, blurp. Now, I'll save this because this is working really well. Very organic, very cellular. What do we even call this? I don't know. I'm just going to call it ripples. Turn off caps lock. Thank you very much. Ripples, fields. We are currently feeding it this initial state based on this matrix object, but we don't need to feed it that. So as an alternative inside of this vertex map, let's turn that off so it's not being fed anything and start out with a noise. So random field, currently it's a Perlin noise, no animation speed. Feed this any noise that we like. So let's give it, it's gonna have to be real big. Yeah, something like this. So there's a Voronoi 1, which will be circular, but some of them can be pretty cool. Something like a Voronoi, not 2. Is it Voronoi 3? Yeah, Voronoi 3. You get this kind of shape, which is pretty neat. And this is also its own type of fall off. And that is the initial state we're feeding in. As long as this is an entire transition, we should be able to click on this one. And we are getting the original one in. So let's see. Does this make sense? Set that to normal max. Doesn't seem to be feeding into the second one very well. It shows it there, but why is this remapping seemingly not remapping? Odd. Well, let's just figure this out real quick. If I turn on this curvature, that's not liking it. The clamping isn't working. Can we... Why is it not remapping? Can we remap it inside of this field? Let's just put a curve and see if that is... Yeah, that's enabling us to do it. So maybe we can just do this all in one. I'm not sure why it doesn't like it. I'm going to copy that field and paste it in here. And can we just feed that in as the source directly? And if we can... Oh, maybe, I mean, maybe it doesn't like this ping pong. Maybe that just isn't a thing. But that's very bizarre to me because... Or is it working? And I would think we'd see the visual of it, though. I mean, okay, maybe it is working, but why? It doesn't feel like it's not refreshing this vertex map in here. Or we're seeing the... Oh, I think I understand. We're seeing the entire... Okay, I do understand. This was super confusing me. But you know how when we are viewing this matrix one, do you see how the entire thing is almost at 100%? It's not quite, but it's almost entirely at 100%. But now we're feeding it, when we use the noise, we're feeding it an entire spectrum from white to red. And that means the entire thing is getting tiled by our values here. So this map is getting tiled again. It's looping all this stuff. Now, I'm not sure why we're not seeing it very clearly in this vertex map. I feel like we should be seeing it. We're not, but the end result is getting fed out. So it's too strong. We're not traveling through it. So all we need to do here is set our remapping. We just have to give this a really big minimum. So these need to be, yeah, this needs to be like way up, really powerful, enough to transition. These all have different values. But now we've done that. If we click into here, this should be chilled out, way more chilled out. So if we hit play, then now, yeah, now we've got the cellular look transitioning and doing its own thing. And that's all about how much we clamp that. So if this looks too busy, all we have to do is keep on increasing our minimum. And that means less animation will happen here. Now you can see the whole thing has been slowed down. And it's going to transition through more slowly. So the very important variable on that one, but very neat. I like that. The and then, I mean, that's working great. Let's go into the initial noise. And I don't know if this will work, but let's animate our initial noise. And now when we click on this, then not only should these all be growing, kind of doing its own thing, but these cells should be hopefully slowly transitioning. It's hard to tell, but I do feel like the shape is changing slowly, not as much as I want it to, so no need to be subtle. Let's go 5 times as fast. Yeah, now it's going to be hard to see because they're the way they're transitioning, but I think any given cell, like watch this cell right there. See it disappeared and shrunk and turned into a new one. So it actually kind of hides it, but these are now transitioning and moving all over the place and doing their own thing. The only thing I'm confused by is why we're not seeing it very clearly here. It doesn't seem to be visually representing our end result very well. Having said all that, I like this. That's good. But I really like this matrix version. I really like the, first of all, we're seeing, or maybe we're not. All right. Oh, I dragged the random in there directly, but maybe was it never? I thought we were seeing the looping really well before, and now I don't feel like we are. What did I do that broke that? Maybe the color vertex map broke it? That'd be weird. I'm going to delete it just for a moment. I mean, I'm seeing a little bit of movement here, but it's not a full transition. Yeah, I'm a little confused. I'm glad we saved the earlier file. I got to look into that a little bit more, but I just like, what I was getting to is I do just like the way this matrix object looks. We could probably do different deformations or different start points and create more or less of them. And there's, do you see how these are all starting at the exact same time, where they're all kind of like in the same sequence? We might even be able to offset those a little bit by giving this a little bit of vertical height, so they're not all exactly in the same spot. So my guess would be if I move this just a little bit, like 5%, well, five units. Okay, that's not enough. Let's do 55. Yeah, there we go. Now look, now they're all slightly offset from each other because we gave them a little bit of vertical offset. So you see they're a little bit in the air, which means our fall off is reaching at slightly different points. And these are all not perfectly in sync. And if we keep moving them further, then these circles should each start getting more out of sync from each other, that's pretty great, actually. Yeah, some verticalness on this. I wasn't thinking about it, but some verticalness just adds in natural variation. So we'll give it a full fall off here. And now these are each free to be offset however they want to. And we'll get infinite looping with that. Wow, that's great. I gotta say, everybody, this episode 21 is one of my favorite episodes. We've tackled so many individual questions that had really cool answers. So, and that only took 20 minutes. So wonderful question, everybody. Let's see. Abraham, the specs on my computer are pretty good. I can never remember them. And I used to have a link to them, but let me see if I can. It just takes a moment to pull up. I just have to find the right window here. One moment. Sorry, I've got a lot of windows open. I'm glad you can't see my other screen because it'd be embarrassing how many windows I have open. Not that window, not that window. Yes, that one. Aha. And now I can search for AVA. My computer's from AVA Direct. And here's my order confirmation. And there are all the specs of the computer. So let's see, where can I put this? It might look messy in the chat, but I'm going to drop this in the YouTube. Oh, that's super messy. And oh yeah, and it's way too long. It doesn't allow that much. Well, I guess I got to put in something else though, because I don't want my email popping up on the screen. Let's make a text document, open this up, paste it. And there we go. Boom. And increase our font. That's too much. Yeah, 14 is fine. So what do we got in here? I'm so not a computer hardware guy at all. Chad designed my computer. So we got Intel i9 2 GTX T800, 64 gigs of RAM, power supply, blah, 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 blah. Bunch of I got a giant hard drive and then a solid state one. So I don't know, take a screenshot and I'm going to pull this off the screen in a few seconds. But that is my current stuff. Once my proper website is up, this will be available somewhere on the site. So that's it right there. Next question. Baz, what do you got? At 33 seconds, the paper falls from above and then folds neatly and bunches up. That sounds tricky, but let's see what we got. Microsoft Yammer. No audio. I think we might have tackled something like this in some earlier streams, but let's see what we've got. Well, wait, let's see. At 33 seconds, sorry. So, but oh yeah, we've done this effect before. Let's see what happens at right around. Well, first of all, before I forget, this is from Tendril, which I assume is a studio. It's a design and motion studio in Toronto. Okay, excellent. Let's see what we got. I mean, I like the look here, but this effect is the one you're talking about. Oh, okay. So sort of a ribbon layering up. Yeah, that's neat. It looked very clean here. Now, you're saying that you've tried to do it. It doesn't. No, you're saying it doesn't have to be a perfect roll, but actually keep making it a perfect roll might help here. You can't even get it not to fall over to one side. Yeah, you kind of want it to stay up in the air. So how would you kind of keep this alive? So I've got some thoughts on it. Let's save this as the second version. There's still some mysteries in there, but I want to explore that some more. You'll see this effect again for sure. And it was only just something I kind of ran into, is the ability for the curve. I already love the curve, and the curve is so much more powerful when you can start tiling it and looping it. Anywho, what do we want to do here? I want to make some ribbons. So one thing we could do is just kind of make a giant ribbon, but I'm feeling a little more tricky today. What if we make this two-dimensionally out of the spline, so we do make that perfect ribbon? So this can get interesting potentially. I'm going to begin with a helix. The helix shall be no radius, no rotation. Aim it straight up on the X and Z plane, and we're going to need a lot of line here. So let's make it 2,000 units tall, which is a lot. Maybe not, it's not an infinite amount, but it's a lot. And currently there are 100 units between, there's 100 subdivisions, and make sure that you set your intermediate points to none. So there are potentially 20 units between each point. If we divide that by 100, then we are left with 20, which means we might need 10 to be the distance between. So just as an example, let's do a check. Here's the thought. If this was a noodle, we put the helix inside the sweep, put the end side above, so we can get the noodle shape. I'll increase the size count, and we'll make a radius of 5. So that is what I'm thinking is our natural distance between all of those points, because it's so long. I think that is what it ends up being. We can prove it. Well, I could be wrong, by making this a soft body, making that dynamic. Under collision, I'm going to turn on a margin, and I said it was a margin of 10. So let's hit play and see if it explodes. Nope. And the goal here is to see if this, okay, it looks like it was 10. And so I should have set the sweep to be a radius of 10. So that, you see, this is the thickness of it. You see how it's piling up, and we're creating this nice kind of noodle, and it's not overlapping itself, and it's even making that cool spiral, which is pretty neat. Okay, so, that makes sense. That works. There's a refresh issue in S22. So sometimes when I rewind, you see right there, let me show you. If I let that play and I rewind, it doesn't reset. So what I've been doing is 1 frame forward, 1 frame back, and that does seem to force a reset. A little annoying. Okay, that is the theory behind it. We have this noodle, but this sweep is inconsequential. It's really just about how this is dynamically reacting. Now, let's get trickier. Here is a floor. I'm going to make a second floor and rotate it upward, so it's flat. And then we know it's 10 thick, so I'm going to move it 5 units over. Or 10. Is it 10? Yeah, it's a radius of 10. So this has to move over 10 units. Now I'm going to make a second, well, I guess a third floor, and I'm going to rotate it 180 degrees the opposite way. And this one will become positive 10. So these two we don't want to see, and we definitely don't want them to render. Those are now invisible walls that it's impossible for that line to escape through. Now I'm actually going to go nuts, and let's make a fourth one. This one, I'm going to tilt backwards from that side, and also scoot this back to -10. So what we've done is we have trapped, it's going to be really hard to visualize, but we have trapped in these, between these floors, we have trapped this line, this noodle shape, so that it can only travel up and down, and then it can go infinity up, and we can go infinity to the right. But everything else, it is completely blocked from doing it. Now, technically, we could just do that by trapping it into a box, but a box does not like perfectly calculate. And these floors dynamically, perfectly, very smoothly calculate. So I think we're gonna have to put some curve in here and maybe do some additional settings, but let's just see what this gives us. In fact, let's go ahead and render the noodle so we can actually see the entire thing. And what we should hopefully see is essentially a 2-dimensional scene. So as I crank this up, we can see, let's make a nice material. Let's go full noodle, even though we're not making a noodle. We'll do that. So you can see what we've got. So these are all piling up and layering on top of each other. And you see we're actually getting pretty nice ribboning. But I think I would like to let this slide forward. So I might give this a little bit of a curve. Now this one won't be, perfectly mathematically calculating, but if I were to make a, what's the best way? What's the best shape? It's actually not an easy shape to make. I guess I shall create a arc and spin it 180. I'm just going to eyeball this and move it up into the air like this. And that will be sort of along those lines. And then extrude it. And that, as long as we line it up here, then that should be working properly. And essentially I want this to be a ramp that can smoothly transition out. So it's going to want to slide that way. Make it also dynamic. Rigging, simulation, collider body, static mesh is fine. Now that will not as smoothly calculate as we already mentioned. I'm going to move the helix up in the air so it's a little up in the air before it goes. Hit play, and that should slide forward. I want no friction on it, or very low friction. So that should, you see it more slowly slides down. So that gives us a good start here. Now, this floor, I want these walls actually to have 0 friction. The walls shouldn't be friction, but that can smoothly move. But the floor, the actual real floor, that should give us a pretty significant amount of friction. In fact, it already is. You can see that starts clumping up right there, and everything starts trying to layer up a bit. So yeah, that's actually working quite nicely. Now, the curvature that we're seeing here is the main thing, and that is controlled effectively by a single parameter, and that is inside the soft body. It is the flexion setting. So essentially flexion and its damping are the only variables we really care about when it comes to this kind of soft body spline. So the bigger the flexion, the bigger the loops will be. If a really tight flexion, in fact, let's drop this down to 5, and immediately we should see them kind of collapse. They're not trying to maintain their relative rotation that much. So you see we're going to get this type of layering up, which actually pretty cool right away. It's a neat look. Now, actually, this is a good time. We're going to play with the flexion more in a moment, but I want to see if we can smooth this out as some sort of post effect. Otherwise, we'd have to throw in the subdivision surface, but actually a tracer might be a good way to go, because I keep trying to use the Mo spline, and the Mo spline doesn't give the proper settings. So let's see if this works. If I have the helix selected and I create a tracer, can I connect all elements? I'm going to hide that. If I connect all elements, you see this is all hidden, but the tracer is showing the same spline because it's tracing it, because it's connecting all the elements, including its points. But what's cool about the tracer is it gives us the exposed settings here of a linear and all these different types of splines. So if I set this instead to a B spline, I can set this to something like uniform, and look, it's going to make a smooth version of that. So we can run our dynamics on a smaller one and then get the curvy version afterward. So if we were to zoom up here and view this as our text, you can see that this is going to layer up and we get these nice curves and they layer up really nicely. But really, that's what's doing the dynamics. We just get the smoother curve afterward. So with that in mind, now we can play. I haven't saved this yet, which I should because it's going well. Save it. We're doing well today. 5A. Let's see, what do we got? Noodles and paper rolls. So let's let that run again. Okay, so playing with flexion. I guess we can just let that run. If I jump this back up to 50, then you're going to see it's going to want to straighten out to these larger curves, which could be really nice. Yeah, see, that's really nice, these big curves. But you can increase it. I can say 150. It's 3 times as strong. So it really wants to do these big, wide curves. But it's almost so big and wide that it's not allowing for the stacking. So, there's probably a happy medium in there. In addition to that, never underestimate the power of damping. It actually has a huge effect on things usually. So let's try putting 0 damping and see what happens. Okay, you see very different effect right there. And let's put 99% damping and just look at what that one does. The same simulation twice, only changing the damping. And look at how dramatically different those two results are. And anything in between is going to give, obviously, different results. So definitely never forget about playing with the flexion. I'm going to attempt to crank the friction up on the floor a lot. So let's make this like 200%. So this really should try and stop quickly, and then they'll start stacking up behind. I'm going to go nuts. Let's go 2,000. And then it's going to start piling up. Yeah, it's going to pile up more nicely there. And potentially we could lower the friction on the spline. So this can be 1/10. So this is probably going to slide again. So it's going to slide. But these lines are very free to roll on each other. So if we keep on compensating by making the floor very, very heavy friction, but the line can very easily roll on top of itself. So you can see we get these more, there's more of this rolling look. And then, just keep that in mind, because the opposite is putting a lot of friction on the line, the noodle here. And you can see that these are clumping up more and not rolling over each other as much. So stylistically, you get a lot of options there. So yeah, that's looking nice. We have our tracer, which is actually still tracing. We're just not seeing it. So if we wanted to, well, a couple things. First of all, it's running incredibly quickly. So I feel safe in making this twice as long and then doubling our point count. Whatever we multiply that by, we should multiply this by, and that will maintain the relative, the relativeness of everything else. So yep, this is just stacking up in a really nice kind of ribbon-esque way. The way you build your setup and the way you block it will dramatically change the results there. But I like the way that looks. Now, the actual question was about a paper ribbon, and we've been working on this noodle. So how do you actually make a paper ribbon? Well, hopefully this works. We should be able to just create an extrude. We have our tracer, which is nice and smooth. Put that into the extrude, and it doesn't seem to know what direction to go. So I'm going to say, I'm going to take control. I want to push on Z, and now you can see that that's pushed over to the side. Create a nice white material here. Apply that there. And now hit play, and that ribbon is going to do whatever we told the rest of this thing to do. And now we get this really nice, perfectly flat ribbon because we're treating it 2-dimensionally. So all we have to do is hide the noodle, and now we've got these reams of paper that are going to, be bunching up and layering up on top of each other. Now, in this case, maybe the thickness of the paper is bad because now you see they are maintaining this distance between them. So there's, it's infinite possibilities. Let me save this again as another version. Infinite combinations of how you want that to run and what the thresholds should be, because if we make it so that this has, let's say, double the points, now we have to cut the radius in half. But by cutting this radius in half, we now have more resolution. It's going to start slowing down. We have more resolution, but they'll be half the distance away. And look at that, look at this layering up that we're getting, which is looking pretty good. Now, some of these are passing through each other, so I think we'd have to increase our steps per frame, but look at that layering. That's lovely. Let's hit Control D and double our steps per frame. I mean, the roll of paper here is quite long, so we're starting to get a lot of slowdown. And why don't we turn on a little SSAO? And since it's looking pretty good, why don't we even put a light in here and get some shadow going? Something like this. Shadow. Viewport. Some shadow, please. There we go. Just a little more contact on it. Let me try and move it to a good position. Oop. Move, please. Yeah, that makes sense. Come on. Zoom. All right, good enough. Blub, 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 blub. Yeah, it's been doing a better job not passing through itself. Some of them still seem to be. We might need to increase the steps per frame a little bit more. Yeah, definitely more. I mean, I hope that there's the point where if we put enough steps, these can't really pass through each other. Keeping an eye on it. We're getting very consistent rolls. Oh, some of those, that one actually fought through itself right away. So there could be some different limits on here we got to keep in mind. The curls are brilliant, but these are passing through. Keep in mind, it's got nothing to do with that tracer, and it's all the noodling. We can see the noodle is, it's actually even forcing itself past the, that's my own fault. I thought it wasn't working, but we shrank it in half, and I forgot to move all the floors to half the amount. So they were able to scoot past each other. So that was on me. That should automatically fix it. And honestly, we probably don't need all these extra steps per frame. 10 is fine. Now, they still might, but yeah. So now we get kind of this cool looking weird brain thing. But once we get our smoothed out spline version of it, we end up with something like that, which by itself is cool. And then we extrude that and we'll get these crazy layered up ribbon piles. So like I said, the more points we have, the smaller the radius is. Eventually, the more that those can get really close to each other. So stylistically, you have whatever options you want. And that's going to create something that's so nice and clean that I'm kind of inclined to leave it in this type of two-dimensional thing. You'll never get as nice piling up if that's really nice. You'll never get it as nice if this was actually running the soft body simulation on the actual paper. And I just think you have a lot more quick control stylistically over the way this will eventually look by doing this. And now that we have added a lot more points to it, I think that flexion is probably weaker. So if we were to double our flexion, then you're going to see instantly this is going to try and puff out to be like smoother curves. And yeah, immediately it's trying to. Now, all the friction is going to prevent some of it, but I think this will look more ribbony because it's trying to maintain it's trying to maintain smoother curves. Almost gets to be like a little taffy type of thing. It's pretty neat. Yeah, the big curves. It's trying not to layer up as much. You get these bigger curves, which I think is a positive in this case. Double it again. Boing. There will get to be the point where it just doesn't quite work out, but I'm just throwing random settings at it, and all the settings are looking nice. So that's to its credit. Blah, 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 blah. And just for the fun of it, if we were to Google, let's see, we'll go here and Google receipt. Or, yeah. Oh, that's not receipt. Receipt. Yeah, I knew there's a hidden letter in there. I always forget. Search for images, and once again, tools, usage rights, change with modification. Just puts us safely there. And I just want to find a generic one. So here's a generic shopping list. So let's save image as episode 21. Scene files, texture. Receipt. And then let's just put that in here because why not? Color channel, feed in an image, the receipt. There's a little bit of shadows coming with it, but I'm not going to fret about it. It looks like it's not rotated the correct orientation. And there's no, I really wish inside the basic material that there was just a, if we click on material tag, that we could just say, oh, rotate 90 degrees. I don't think that there is one of those. It definitely doesn't work if you change the coordinates. I don't think it does. But let's go back to, just real quick, because we're already went this far, back in the Photoshop, open the receipt, image, rotation 90 degrees, save it again, that's fine, close, back to cinema, reload image. I hope I didn't mess it up, and maybe it was correct and I just needed to, I was gonna have to tile, but it was like, oh, clearly it's not the correct orientation. Let's start tiling it. I was super wrong. It was correct. That's on me. I just assumed it was the wrong orientation. I knew I had to tile it, but all right, fine. My bad. Save, close, reload again. Reload. Is it not reloading? That's weird. Why is it not updating? Didn't I embed it? Brr. Okay, well now we're just spending a silly amount of time on an extra detail, but why is that not rotating? Did I double bluff myself? Reload. Yeah, why is it not? Why isn't it updating? So I think it was right, not rotated. I'll save it as a new name because it's just being difficult. And we'll put it in here. All this to make it look just a tiny little bit better. Scene file, texture, receipt, open. What? All right, I give up. It's not rotating. I've tried both orientations and it's just lost its mind. Oh, I just wanted to give it a nice tiled texture. I'm doing something silly in there, but well, now it looks like a bunch of lottery tickets coming through. Ring, ring, ring. And yeah, this all just working really nicely. Gives you a lot of possibilities here. I wonder if you could, I don't really want to, but as far as you, I mean, if it doesn't work, I'm not going to worry about it beyond it. But could we art direct this a little bit by making a bend deformer? And bend it, keep the Y length, bend it 90 degrees. Can we make this a child of the extrude? And yeah, just let it bend like this. So, you know, we could potentially, you know, you can still art direct this a little bit by, you know, letting the dynamics happen two-dimensionally and then afterward bending it. And let's see how that looks if we run it. Yeah, it starts stretching a little bit distinctly, but if you had a little bit softer, or if the text was the proper orientation, that might work better. Yeah, look at that nice ribboning though. I'm quite pleased with that. And the, you know, the bend is an option potentially. Yeah, I'm going to save that, and we are already 15 minutes over the standard time. I'll take a look at the chat, but I do have a bunch of things to do, so I don't think I can spend too much extra time today. Since I've started doing an extra bonus stream and trying to record a weekly tutorial, I have a lot less time in my day. Ibrahim, I think, apologies if I'm not pronouncing anywhere near, but Ibrahim, morphing one face into another, or like a gun to a liquid. Oh man, that's not, I don't have a I don't have that. That's a huge question. My quick answer would be I'm not going to be able to answer it today, but my quick answer would be look into maybe some volume stuff. If putting things inside of a volume and allowing them to expand or blur into each other could go a really long way. Let's see if we can do I'm going to attempt to not spend forever on it, but let's try and do a 2-minute version of this. And this could be silly, but let's try and morph like this dog head into a person head, like on a somewhat reasonable scale, and see how well we can do that. And honestly, I don't even have a great plan for this, so this is probably a horrible idea. So sorry, doggy, you're gonna lose your eyeballs. We don't need all of this, so you're gonna become a trophy dog. And the lady, we don't need beyond your neck here. There we go. So we got something like that. So will this be fed into a volume properly? We probably have to close the hole so it becomes a volume. So sorry, doggy, but let's go ahead and fill in those eye holes. Bing! And the neck hole. Is the mouth closed? Yeah, the mouth is a volume, so that's fine. And then the female bust, close that, so it should be watertight now. I think actually there's a setting in volumes that would automatically do that. So I don't know how well this will work. Like I said, I don't even really have a good plan here. My main thought was to make a builder, and we probably do a lot of this in the builder. If we throw the female head into the builder, apparently we're really, really tiny right now. I wouldn't mind scaling everything up to become a little bit more uniform in a default scene. Something like that. Yeah, see, I want it to be about the size of a cube, and that felt about right. Now we can start shrinking this to be some reasonable resolution. I'm going to keep it pretty low res, so you can see we get this kind of shape, and we can also drag in the dog, who just kind of pops in there. Now, we can mask these out via various methods. So this could actually be weird and interesting. If we take, let's see, I think we clearly want, do we want the dog to turn into the woman or the woman to turn into the dog? It doesn't really matter. So let's just say we have got the dog here, and the dog is going to morph into the face. If I create a cube, and I scoot it into position, if I say volume, I want this cube to subtract from the dog. You'll see that as I move this down, the dog is going away. So that's kind of just one thing. And at the same time, it could be kind of weird. Can we drag this in? Can we add actually, I'm going to make a folder and put both these into the folder. So that's subtract that. And then we've got the female, the face, drop that into a folder. Can I feed it the same cube a second time? I think so. So nice. I want to see where they intersect. So if this works, as I pull this down, yeah, you see the female head is appearing and the dog is disappearing. So it's a very blunt tool there. But my thought was, as that transition happens, we can create a smooth overall. So this smoothing is something we could keyframe in. So right now, if we blur it more, it is a very blurred shape. So you get the dog and then you would start blurring it. And as it's blurry, we could do this morph, and that morph will transition in a very weird way, but then it would kind of finally go there, and you'd keyframe those two opposing. That's like this weird rough idea I have of it. So let me see if I can show it. What's the best way to show this? So if right around there, I guess it's still going to be weird and not great, but keyframe that and whatever at the frame 60, we'll have done the full transition. Oh wait, I went in and then out. So let's just do that. All right. Now, did I keyframe? Yeah, I did. Okay. Now we got on the volume builder, and we've got this smooth, and right at now, I think I'd want to keyframe the strength, and then over some time, pull the strength down so it goes back to full accuracy. And then at the beginning, honestly, the cube, we should have let that wait a little bit of time. So now the smooth is going to be nice and, you know, smooth-ish here. And at the very beginning, it'll have no smoothing. So it becomes pretty sharp again. I didn't quite keyframe the cube properly. I guess we can move that up a little bit extra. And at the end, there's going to be an extra bump there, but I'm going to ignore it. So let's just look at this. So the dog is going to kind of blur, kind of get a little bit melty, and then it's going to transition into the other shape, and then it's going to re-sharpen back up again. So if we put this into a mesher, I don't expect it to look amazing, but that is going to kind of get melty and then transition and then sharpen up again. You know what? It looks better than I was expecting it to. It's not amazing, but it's not bad. I'm going to put the sharpening happening earlier. It'll happen quicker. Also, that can happen partially during the morph. So let's try that again. And it'll melt in. I want to kind of, I guess, let's keep having it get even smoother. So right around here, let's have smoothed even more, because it gets real weird there. So it's going to keep melting and then come in and then go into that. So like I said, it's not amazing. We could increase the resolution, which will just keep slowing us down, but it'll give us a more accurate model. It's actually still running reasonably well. So, you know, it's not as bad as I thought it would be, like I said. Now, having said that, like, we did the most basic version. These are just like the models just slapped in there in the rawest way possible. So something that would be pretty smart would be, you know, we're feeding in these raw meshes, but if we took the dog and you actually did a couple morphs on here, like if you morph the snout coming forward via any method you want, that would go a long way, making sure the ears kind of blended in, like by just doing a couple morphs, a couple keyframes of the way those transition, that would make it a lot more powerful, a lot more making the effect work. That's even like, you know, and that's, like I said, doing the roughest possible thing. So it would be kind of fun if you even put a morph on the human head where you could have the nose like stretched out a little bit and you have it transitioning in, and the dog one is transitioning in as well. So that double movement would blend together. And a lot of this, you know, the more motion, the more that's layered up on top of it, the more and just stuff overall would really, you know, add a lot to it. As a final step here, and then we'll be done, I'm just going to put a displacer and put a noise. And I'm just going to have like this weird displaced big noise on it as well, as a way of kind of like hiding more of the motion. So give it a speed. Actually, no, it's not 25%. It's that. So speed of 2 is quite a bit. Scale of 2. And the motion's moving downward. So I'm going to give it a little bit of downward motion, which is probably -1 and 1%. I'm not sure. Let's try hitting play. Nope. I always get it backwards. So now it's kind of got this downward motion as well. It looks pretty weird, but okay, that looks worse. So we'll go easy on it. I guess if you're, you know, depending on what you're doing, something like kind of spiky might look nice. So let's try that. And it's based on the noise, so that might be okay. And in the same way we're doing everything else, we want, it's going to begin the morph right around there. So let's say here, this will be at 100%, and around here, we're around 100%, but that will quickly transition out to 0, to 0. And it will quickly transition in from 0. And I don't know if that will look any better. It's just going to be another way of hiding what you're doing. Yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, layering up, and, you know, it's not amazing, but it's not bad. If I jump this back up again, we'll get a little bit better frame rate. And the face. Funky, but like I said, better than I was expecting for how quick we were doing that. I mean, now if I was really doing this, what you would actually do is use like you would use the same base mesh, like you get a good human mesh, and then you'd manipulate and morph the human head until you get to a dog. And I've seen really great models that do that kind of thing. Morph from dog to human. I've seen really great models that can do that kind of thing. And I mean, honestly, the basic topography of any given animal is not necessarily that different because we all have a mouth and a nose and 2 eyes and 2 ears. So as long as you use the same geometry and stretch it to become the other bits of it, that would go a really, really long way. Just not, obviously not something I can do here in a live stream. That's something that would take, like, if you had a good base mesh, it'd take even the basic version, I would think. I don't know if it's really low poly, but the version I would want to do, it'd probably be like 5 hours of modeling to transform the human to the dog. And then you could use all sorts of really cool morphs and fall offs and jiggles to like really do this great transition. But this is the 5-minute version. Yeah, Zach, I was thinking about that too. Would be to use a noise instead of a cube, but it was going to be harder to do that transition, so I just skipped over it. That's why a doggy mask on Halloween fits the best. Okay, we're a full half hour over. I'm feeling really good about it. We did a bunch of really great questions. I'm actually super happy with all the questions that we tackled here. That sequin thing was wonderful. I really liked it. Ignoring dynamics, the ripples, that was great. The paper roll, even this morphing, like I really liked these. So I think that will wrap this one up for today. If you like this content, if you want these scene files, if you want a bonus live stream on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I have a Patreon set up. You can find the link below, both on YouTube and on Twitch. It should already be there. I couldn't do this without you, without people coming and doing these questions. It's really fun to keep on exploring. One of the reasons I do this is, well, first of all, I get a lot of questions throughout the week on Twitter and on YouTube and on all the platforms. I get people asking questions, even tracking me down via email and being like, how do I do this? If I was answering those, I would be doing full-time tech support for Maxon, and that is not something I want to be doing. So that's why these live streams exist, and it helps keep me sharp at, trying to do these different challenges that I wouldn't necessarily do unless there was people asking about it. So but anyway, the Wednesday live stream is always going to be free for everybody. The replays are put up at the end of the week on the secondary YouTube channel. Make sure you also subscribe to that one. I was talking about that earlier, but yeah, I put the replays on a separate channel, so make sure you subscribe to that one as well. I'm doing weekly tutorials that come out every Tuesday, so subscribe to the main channel to get access to those. I'm experimenting with formats, trying to make them a little bit quicker. I'm experimenting with doing project-based ones and maybe doing some more like, let's make something very distinct instead of something more like a broad technique, making something more definitive. So maybe like, let's rig a character from start to finish. Would be pretty cool. So, but anyway, Tuesdays is the practice and recording of the tutorial. Thursday live stream is just exploring things a little bit deeper. So that stuff, all, if it's good, it ends up as a tutorial. So all the good content ends up out there for everybody for free. But support is super appreciated, especially if anything I did here ends up, like, if you end up getting a paid client that you use a technique, that'd be neat if you want support. But like I said, not necessary, but appreciated. One last thing, we have a Slack channel. So go ahead and go to rocketlassoslack.com and you can sign up and join the same community of people who've been asking and answering questions in this stream. Those same types of people are hanging out there. There are challenges and sketch challenges and chain projects and people just asking and answering questions. So it's a really friendly place of people, just supporting each other and trying to make cool things. That should wrap up this stream. It was really fun. I enjoyed all those questions. In fact, I've been trying to make tutorials inspired by the techniques, and now I don't know what I'm going to pursue from here because a lot of this was really cool. So thank you so much, everybody. Stay healthy, stay safe, take care of each other, and I'll see you next week. So bye-bye, everybody.